Welcome you back to the continuation of our session here in Miami. This is the public testimony section, and we'd like to welcome all of you who will be sharing your thoughts and views with us to this. We have a list of those of you who have signed up. If there is anyone who would like to speak who has not signed up, please let us know in the back and we'll add you to the list. If we could ask you to form two lines, basically, of folks to talk so we can move through expeditiously, we would appreciate it. And as well, we will ask you to hold your remarks to 5 minutes. We'll have a little timing light structure. It goes yellow with a minute to go, just so you know. And with that, we welcome you, and forgive me if I mispronounce something because I'm reading handwritten notes, but Kathy Culliton Gonzales, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here before this commission. My name is Kathy Culliton Gonzales. I'm the Director of Voter Protection for Advancement Project, and I'm presenting the testimony that you see before you and the study that you have before you on behalf of the people of Florida and voters of color of Florida. It's an honor to be here with all of our community partners. Advancement Project is a national civil rights organization, and we've been working on voting rights in Florida since 2000. So we actually work to try to remove structural and legal barriers to voters of color, and we work across the country, but we've always had a strong presence here in Florida, and we've been pretty busy. Our submission talks about all kinds of different barriers for voters of color that we found in Florida in the 2012 elections, but I just want to concentrate on one, which is called the time tax. The time tax was first coined by Chris Adley when he took a look at polling place resources for us. And the time tax is defined as a government policy or practice that forces one citizen to pay more in time to vote compared to his or her fellow citizens. So we actually have taken a look at this issue here in Florida and conducted a study based on data of waiting times here in Florida, and it's the only known study that we know of that's not based on polling, but it's based on election administration data entirely. We've submitted it. It's a groundbreaking study by professors Dan Smith and Michael Herron. And what they did is they studied the closing times of precincts across the state of Florida. They studied the closing times of 5,196 of the 6,100 precincts on Election Day here in Florida. Their study also includes in-depth research on early voting wait times in Miami-Dade, which kept very good data on early vote waiting times. And the precinct-level study covers more than 90% of Florida's 12.6 million registered voters. And what they found is that after the cut in early voting from 14 days down to 8 days last year, there indeed was a time tax. And voters of color paid that time tax more than white voters did. Taking a good look at the precinct level closing times, we know some precincts closed at 2 a.m. and others closed at 7 p.m. And we know the racial composition of the voters in each of those precincts across the state of Florida because Florida voter registration forms ask people to identify their race, Black or Hispanic or white. So on Election Day across the state, our experts found that the greatest time tax was actually paid by Latino voters. Generally speaking, Black voters also waited longer than white voters did on Election Day in these 5,196 precincts. In early voting in Miami-Dade, the greatest time tax, the greatest disparity in wait times was paid by African American voters, but Latino voters were also affected and waited longer times than white voters did. They also found that young voters under 30 were found to have waited longer than older voters, including those over 65, which is surprising, but the data is the data, and we have to take a look at the data. So what we find is actually really quite disturbing, and as civil rights lawyers, we've been trying to figure out what it is that has caused this problem. We have very specific recommendations of kinds of election administration measures that can help reduce this time tax and close these disparities. They include full restoration of early voting, not making it discretionary, a polling place resource formula, language access measures, electronic poll books, and all kinds of things that the real experts, who are the people on the ground here in Florida, can tell you about. And we hope that you take them into consideration. And I guess I just want to end with a story. So Dessalene Victor couldn't be here today, but her story is definitely going to be told by the folks who met her during early voting. I also wanted to say that, speaking of Latinos and the time tax paid by Latinos, I was here during early voting, and I was here on election day too. And I met a Cuban American family. They had to come 3 times to vote, 3 separate days to vote. They waited over 3 hours every single time. It was their first time voting in our country. They have a 3-year-old and a baby, and they had to work on Tuesday, election day, because they work in the service industry. They had to come and vote 3 times, and they almost couldn't vote if it weren't for the efforts of advocates on the ground to try to push a little more hours of early voting. So I don't think that's what democracy is supposed to be in the United States, and we're here to help solve this, and we're available for more input, and our experts are also available for more input, and we do want to recommend very specific measures that can help stop this burden. Thank you very much for your time.
And I do want to definitely emphasize to you and to others who have come here that this is an ongoing process, and if there's additional information you want to submit, absolutely at any time, we are welcome it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to take too much more time because I know you want to hear from members of the community and from voters, but we do have very specific data and very specific recommendations that we know can help close this gap in the time tax. Thank you.
Carolyn, sorry, this is,
A lot of people have problems with my last name. It's Gelee, G-E-L-E.
you've got to read the scroll too.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. My name is Colleen Gelee. I work with SEIU. I will focus today on point 2 and 7 of the executive topics regarding training, number of poll workers, voting accessibility for individuals with disabilities, limited English proficiency, and other special needs. During the early voting period, I provided language assistance to members of my community at the polls at Miami-Dade County. I acted as a non-partisan community activist, not affiliated with any campaign, candidate, or organizations. A few years back, we realized that Creole assistance was highly needed. Thus, we created a volunteer language assistant program. Despite being a large community of voters with limited English proficiency, we lacked enough bilingual poll workers to provide adequate assistance to those voters. The problem is large enough so that the Miami-Dade Supervisor of Elections Office eagerly welcomes community activists who provide the service during the elections. In my case, I would speak to an average of 60, 70, and sometimes 80 voters each day that needed basic assistance and questions answered in their native language of Haitian Creole. And still, we did not help enough people. We were not able to help everyone who requested the help. At locations with limited or no assistance, these voters became easily discouraged, and many left without ever voting. It is necessary for me to tell you that Haitian Creole, while a spoken language for generations, has only been a standardized written language since 1979. The lack of adequate staffing and training for poll workers, especially with the ability to speak the language of voters, led to very, very long lines and very discouraged voters who sometimes gave up and did not come back. We need to have sufficient assistance at the polls, particularly in counties with high populations of Creole speakers. These need to be trained election staff members who are sensitive to the community, who are sensitive to members, and create a welcoming atmosphere to our democratic process. We also need to prevent limitations to assistance so long as it remains a need in our community. That would lead me to actually piggyback on what Kathy Gonzales said. I would like to tell you the story of Miss Desalyn Victor, 102 years old, U.S. citizen. Ms. Desalyn Victor came to the United States from Haiti at 79 years old. Her first job in the United States was to pick beans at a South Florida farm. And Ms. Victor's first voting experience was at the 2008 elections. She voted in the 2012 elections. She stood in line 3 hours, was turned away for the lack of assistance. She came back. She was turned away again. That's when our volunteers tried to help Ms. Dessalin, and that's how she voted. So thank you for listening to me, and I urge you to have a fair percentage of Creole assistants at the next elections. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Carolyn Thompson. I work for Advancement Project, a civil rights, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working in the state of Florida since the 2000 election. Advancement Project works with election officials, community partners, and voters to protect the fundamental right to vote. During the 2008 and 2012 elections, we established a poll monitoring program, a poll monitoring voter protection program across the 15 largest counties in our state. We did this because we were determined that every voter who stood in line would cast a ballot, and that ballot would be counted, and we knew we had to be there to protect their right to vote and to assist them. We assisted language minority voters and encountered Ms. Dessalin Victor in North Miami. We identified elderly voters who stood in line for long hours. We called election officials and reported this. We got no action. We took it on ourselves to move those voters to the front of the line. We assisted voters who were turned away through no fault of their own. Poll workers could not find them in the database. But luckily, we were staffed with laptops that allowed us to find these voters and advocate for them. Based on this experience, today I'm providing recommendations that relate to topics 1, 4, and 8 of Executive Order 1369. These include recommendations for early voting, polling place resources, and electronic poll books. These are our recommendations. Allow supervisors of elections to have discretion to expand sites for early voting based upon local needs, not the state's recommendations only. Require small counties to offer the same number of early voting hours as large counties. Voters from every region of Florida should have the same opportunity to vote. During early voting, the duration of early voting should not be left to the discretion of 67 individual supervisors of elections. Increase the mandatory number of early voting hours to 168, requiring early voting for 14 days with 12 hours per day, including 2 full weekends. During the 2012 election, Florida had 96 hours of mandatory early voting. We know what those lines look like. 96 hours did not work. Under House Bill 7013, mandatory early voting hours are reduced to only 64 over a period of 8 days. The Commission should be making every effort to increase opportunities to the ballot box. Require all counties to use an electronic poll book for early voting and election day. This will allow voters who move from one county to another to update their address at the polling location and vote a regular ballot. Specifically, disabled voters who are moved through no fault of their own. Those that live in skilled nursing facilities have no control over what county they may end up in. Many of the voters who voted in the 2012 elections and who had moved from one county to the other ended up voting provisional ballots. The majority of provisional ballots in our state are discarded due to poll worker error and sometimes to voting error. So even though that voter may be perfectly well registered in the state. Their only crime was to have moved from Broward County to Miami-Dade County. And they would have lost the right to vote if they do not have the electronic poll book, which allows supervisors to do that automatic update for them. So I want to thank the commission for hearing us today, and please take our recommendations seriously so that 2016 will have a free, fair, and accessible election.
Thank you very much. Lee Chapman.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before this commission. My name is Lee Chapman, and I am the voter protection attorney for Florida at Advancement Project. I frequently visit the state, and I have met many people affected by the election problems during the 2012 election. Today, I'm providing recommendations that relate to topics 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, and 11 of Executive Order 13639. These include recommendations for voter registration modernization, poll worker training and recruitment, and other issues related to election administration. In order to make elections free, fair, and accessible, and to close the racial disparity, Advancement Project recommends the following reforms. Number 1, require all state and local election officials to measure and report the waiting times for voters in every precinct during both early voting and on election day. These waiting times should be public record. The maximum wait time should be no greater than 20 minutes. Florida's average wait time on election day in November 2012 was between 50 and 90 minutes, the longest in the country, and it was reported that many voters stood in line up to 9 hours. Number 2, provide secure online voter registration that does not exclude any eligible voter from participating. Number 3, allow for same-day voter registration for all voters during both early voting and on election day. Number 4, designate and train county election officials to conduct strategic outreach and engagement activities with voters of color, including through community advisory boards, voter registration and participation events, and poll worker recruitment. Number 5, refrain from inaccurate or inappropriate purges of voter registration rolls, especially outside the 90-day window required by the National Voter Registration Act. Number 6, amend the Florida Constitution to provide automatic restoration of civil rights for all people with felony convictions. In Florida, as of 2010, an estimated 1.5 million people could not cast a ballot due to previous felony convictions. Number 7, amend the Florida Constitution to enshrine an explicit fundamental right to vote. All United States citizens over 18 years of age who are residents of the state of Florida shall have a fundamental right to vote in any public election held in the jurisdiction in which the citizen resides. Number 8, provide sufficient bilingual election materials as required by law or as needed by limited English proficient voters, and provide year-round bilingual voter education and outreach efforts. Number 9, train poll workers on the protections of the Voting Rights Act and Florida's Voter Bill of Rights and Responsibilities, both of which provide for voters to receive assistance. Poll workers should readily provide any assistance needed for voters to understand the ballot, and they must permit voters to receive assistance from their own assisters of choice. And number 10, Advancement Project recommends a polling place resource formula. So there needs to be a standardized statutory formula that the state of Florida adopts for a minimum number of people per precinct, as well as number of voting machines per precinct. Thank you for the opportunity to submit Advancement Project's recommendations to you today. I encourage you all to review our extensive list of recommendations and reforms that are described in our public comments. We also invite you to visit our website at www.advancementproject.org for more information.
Thank you. Maribel Balvin.
Good afternoon. My name is Maribel Balvin. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Miami-Dade County, and I'm here this afternoon representing the League of Women Voters of Florida, the thousands of members and volunteers throughout the state, and the millions of Florida voters who overcame incredible obstacles in order to participate in the most recent general election. Our remarks today will address the 6 of the 9 topics included in the presidential executive order, 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 8, although not distinctively, they're general comments that address these issues. We thank you for coming to Florida, a state that has repeatedly demonstrated how essential federal oversight is in ensuring that citizens' voting rights are not undermined. Today, we're here to speak to the issue of partisan manipulation of election laws and the corrosive impact that such tactics have on our democratic process. In 2012, the state of Florida passed a sweeping elections bill that, among other things, shortened the early voting period time, and we saw what happened with that experiment. It forced more voters to rely on provisional ballots, which I'm really happy to hear this morning that we're all moving to the poll books, and that may solve that issue, and we're very pleased to hear that, and from the supervisor of elections saying how that there might be funding available to do such a thing, so we're very pleased with that this morning. And it made it nearly impossible for groups like the League of Women Voters to register voters, eligible voters. We were given a 48-hour period to register a voter and turn in that application, something that was deemed impossible. We actually suspended and we didn't register voters for almost a year until the courts sided with the league, and they gave us at least 10 days from the time we registered a voter to the time we actually have to turn in the registration form. In addition to that, they put we cannot just have volunteers register voters with us now. Everybody has to be registered. We have a number. And it's a process that is still very cumbersome, but at least we do have more time, and we have continued now registering voters in the state after that ruling. Florida was not alone in this endeavor. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, at least 25 laws and 2 executive actions designed to make voting harder were passed in 19 states between 2011 and 2012. Such activities in the states, on the part of state lawmakers, regardless of which party is in power at the time, undermines Americans' confidence in our electoral process and, by extension, the faith in government. During this period of deep cynicism and polarization, it is essential that the very foundation of our democratic society, the ability to freely express your opinion via your ballot, is protected and reinforced, such that no individual or group of individuals can manipulate the rules to benefit themselves and/or harm others. In Florida, we witnessed extremely long lines throughout the state, including lines as long as 8 hours here in Miami-Dade County. I have pictures to show that, and I'll be sending it to be posted on the website. And also saw 3% reduction in voter turnout statewide. Voters in some Florida precincts were still standing in line to vote after midnight on election day, hours after the election had already been called by the national news media. It's good that Florida was not the state that decided that election, or we may still be waiting. An analysis done by Ohio State University professor Theodore Allen estimated that at least 200,000 eligible Florida voters did not participate in the 2012 election simply because of lines at the polls. Additionally, at the League, we received a large number of calls and emails from disabled and elderly voters who were physically unable to endure the long waits. Appallingly, the state of Florida has no requirements that such voters be guaranteed an expedited process, and citizens, like we have heard today so many times, the name of Desalyn Victor, were forced to wait in hours-long line to vote. She is only like the poster child of what so many elderly endured during that election, and I myself witnessed a lot of that too. At this time, it has become obvious that federal action is needed to prevent individual states from unfairly tinkering the election laws for partisan political gain. In the same way that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was essential to ensuring that all Americans, regardless of race and national origin, could exercise their right to vote, the recent wave of voter suppression laws suggests that strong federal standards must be established to protect citizens' democratic rights and restore confidence in our nation's electoral system. This week's Supreme Court decision in Shelby County versus Holder renders your task even more urgent, and we salute you for your work and for your commitment to democracy. Thank you.